Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to paint an Aeldari combat patrol. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week, you and I are going to continue our monthly combat patrol challenge by tackling the Aeldari combat patrol, the Fatebreakers, including a complete and total repose of the Wraith Lord that's included in the kit. And speaking of giant robots, I want to take a brief moment to talk about the massive, life-size, animated Gundam that existed in Yokohama until just a few weeks ago. Fortunately, before the exhibit permanently closed, my family and I had the opportunity to go down to Yokohama, which is about an hour and a half by train south of central Tokyo, and see this once-in-a-lifetime exhibit. Now, the exhibit was open just as the entire world shut down in March of 2020, and was intended to originally only last for 2 years. But because of the global pandemic, the exhibit was extended another 2 years, and only recently was decommissioned. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be any kind of real Gundam fan. Obviously, I know what it is, and I can't walk into any hobby shop in Japan without being faced with a wall of gunplay kits. But nobody in their right mind, Gundam fan or not, would pass up the opportunity to see an 8-story tall animated robot. The exhibit was built on one of the piers in Yokohama Bay and was absolutely impossible to miss. As I said, it's nearly 8 stories tall. And like most things Japanese, the exhibit was exceptionally well organized, and the entranceway, once you've purchased your tickets, was a photographic history of the design, fabrication, and completion of the massive structure. One of the most interesting things about it, besides the fact that it's an 8-story tall moving robot, is that it couldn't be classified as a vehicle. In order to be built at full scale and meet legal code, it had to be classified as a building. So they built this massive gantry structure around it to make it look like it was being prepared for launch. Now, the Gundam is actually fully articulated down to its fingers, and about once an hour, and sometimes only half an hour, it goes through this startup routine where all these exhaust jets shoot out, and the gantry pulls away, and the robot actually steps forward. And during some of the special presentation, it even strikes a pose looking like it's about to jump jet off the platform with this incredible stirring music from the anime behind it. Now, granted, it doesn't move as quickly as a real Gundam would, but I have to tell you, being at the foot of an 8-story tall robot that is moving at all is really something to see. Lastly, I want to share this with you. On your way out of the exhibit, you are greeted with this: a letter of apology from the director of the project. Now, it is written in Japanese and English, and it might be the most Japanese thing I've seen in the 4.5 years that I've lived here. Despite the smashing success of this and the worldwide notoriety that it achieved, the creators felt it just didn't live up to their expectations. So there's this long, formal letter written out apologizing to everyone who's come to see the robot that it didn't move more quickly or realistically. You have to admire how the Japanese strive for absolute perfection and are profoundly apologetic when they don't reach it. Well, enough about giant, planet-defending robots that are the size of a building. Let's talk about the Aeldari Combat Patrol. Now, I've never painted Eldar before, and honestly, the Combat Patrol looked like a lot of fun. But there was one thing that clinched it for me. On the cover of the box, I saw the Wraith Lord, and I saw what an awful, awful pose it was in. Now, of course, it's an older model, and so you can kind of excuse it, but something as cool as that shouldn't just be standing there. So right when I saw it, I knew I was going to buy the box, chop it apart, and completely repose it. So let me show you how I built, customized, and painted an Aeldari Combat Patrol. Starting with the Guardians, I found these really great Elven Temple bases on cults, and they were only about $450 US. So I downloaded them and printed a batch of them, scaling them to the 28mm bases. Using some super glue, I just attached them really quickly. Now, normally I would paint my bases and my models separately, but the feet on these Eldar are so small that I couldn't pin them, so I just had to super glue them to the resin bases. Now, I batched them together on a piece of double-sided foam tape. That makes it a lot easier to sort of gang paint these. And then I just go through with the airbrush and I do a black prime and then a white zenithal. This is going to help define our shapes, and then also it's going to make the red that we're going to use here really punchy when we put it on. I've also kept all my heads separate. If you watch the channel for any length of time, you know that I always keep the heads separate. And in this case, it's extra helpful because the red and the white, it makes it really difficult to paint if they're together. Now here, I'm doing an underspray or a shadow side spray of a dark red. This is Vallejo Gory Red and a little Dark Elf Flesh mixed together. Once that's on, I'm going to do a top-down spray of just Bloody Red from Vallejo. This is a really punchy, vibrant red, and you can see that immediately it starts to define the shapes. Now, one of the things I decided to do was add this gradient along the feet of all of the Guardians, just sort of as this cool, I don't know, I just thought it would look cool. So I went ahead and sprayed the feet there, sort of as a gradient coming up to the knee. And then we'll go through and using Nuln Oil, we're going to pick out the recesses on all the models. Now, we don't have to get everything here, just the major spots to bring out the definition. After this is dry, you could go through and do a lot of edge highlighting and bring out the high points with like a Troll Slayer orange, but I'm just going to leave these as they are. I think they look pretty good. So we'll go ahead and put the heads on now. I wanted to do sort of like an antiqued ivory on the base, and brush painting that white on would take layer after layer, literally hours. So I took 15 minutes and some poster tack, and I masked off the lower portion of the feet to protect that gradient that I had already painted on. So then I quickly brushed on my ivory colors and then did a wash of Seraphim Sepia. So after the wash had dried, I just went through and dry brushed all of the bases with that ivory white again. And I got this really good sort of antique look to the base, which you see in a lot of the materials whenever they show like Eldar fortresses or ruins and things like that. Then I just went through with the black and very carefully retouched the bottoms of their feet. Now, there's no airbrushing the weapons on these. I decided that they would have white weapons, and that meant 2 coats of Corax white and then a single coat of white, and then going through and pin washing everything with Seraphim Sepia. Honestly, the 10 weapons in the Guardian squad took me almost 2 hours to complete because of all the layer work needed. Now here on the flyers, I've created my own bases. They come with those weird clear acrylic bases. I don't really like those, so I printed some at the appropriate scale and then put more of these resin-based toppers on them. And because there's no model attached, it was all very quick, and these turned out really well. I'm really happy with the way they look. Now, all 6 of these jet bikes are the same, basically. Unlike the Guardians, where each one has an individual build, these are all the same. So I just sort of cut out all the parts, spent a couple hours trimming and cleaning everything, and then assembling everything. I actually really like the design of these bikes. They go together really well. Even though the kit is a bit older, the design aesthetically, just the look of it's really cool. I like it a lot. It might be one of my favorite models I've put together as far as like vehicles go. So I'll just put a Zenithal Prime on this. We're going to use a white to make sure, again, the reds are really punchy when they go on over top. And I just love the way the airbrush puts smooth, even coats over large surfaces. On a vehicle, there's just no topping it. Now, to sort of keep in theme with that black gradient that came up from the feet on the Guardians, we're going to do a black gradient along the nose of all of these jet bikes. Now, in the promotional material, there's like a black stripe that goes across, and I could have masked that out, but I wanted, as a theme, this sort of black gradient to appear on all the items in the army, so you'll see how I approach that differently on each one. And then just go through and using Nuln Oil, we'll do a pin wash on all the details. Now you'll notice I've kept the drivers separate here. In the key art, they're red on red, and the rider gets sort of lost in the bike, and I didn't like that. And I wanted to sort of flip the script here and make my riders like a dark gray or a black. So I just painted those separately and put them on afterwards. Now, it does scratch the model when you put it on, but the scratch is covered by the thigh, so it doesn't really matter, and you're able to paint them two separately. I found when I did the Hearthkin Pioneers that it's really difficult to paint the riders once they're glued into the vehicle, so if I can avoid it, I do. Now again, the weapons here, I decided everything was going to be white. It took me 4 coats of paint to do those, but the results look really good. Now, on the promotional art, they show all 6 bikes with this decal, but they only include enough to do 4. So I just did the 2 with the rotary cannon, so I could keep track of what weapons are what, because they're on the underside of the vehicle, you can't really see them. And then the others, I gave them the really fun sort of snake and decal. Now moving on to the HQ, I should have left this off of the base as well. I give it, but again, the feet are so small, it's really hard to sort of pin these separately or put them on cork like you can Space Marines. So I just put it all together, and we did a zenithal highlight, and then of course, I got to be really careful when I go in to paint my whites on. And again, because you're going over the red overspray and the black overspray from the prime, it takes 4 or 5 coats. It's not fun. It's super repetitive, but in the end, it ends up looking really good. Now, I'm going to work my way around the model here, doing all my gold details and trim. If you look closely, a lot of these are meant to be gems, like a lot of the bracelets and trinkets. Ain't nobody got time for that. That's crazy. So we'll hit the big ones here, like the one on his helmet after I've done doing the sepia wash. I'll do that, and some of the ones like on his spear you can see there, and along his chest armor will do, but for the most part I just left them as gold ornamentation. And then we'll go through and put Administratum Gray on the hands and the feet to clean those up, and then Nuln Oil to bring out the details. And once we've got all of our gems painted, we'll go ahead and put the head on, and that'll be it for our HQ. With everything else done, it's time to move on to the main attraction, the Wraith Lord. Look at this thing. I can't. You have this really great design. I love the Eldar Wraith Lord aesthetic, but it is just standing there. Like just straight up standing there. So we're going to completely repose this thing. I was going to put it on a tactical rock, but while trolling cults, I found this really great ruined statuary face. And so I brought it in my 3D program, changed the angle, sliced it so that it would fit on the base. And the problem here is that there's already some sculpted elements on the base. So we'll just go through and using our single-sided nippers sort of slice those off. It's going to damage the base, but all of that's going to get covered in the end when we put this on, and some additional gravel and rocks and things. So we'll use some super glue to glue that down. And once that's in place, we're going to use that as the foundation for our pose. We'll go ahead and super glue that right foot onto the top of this, and that's going to help us establish where our footholds are and how we can adjust the angles of the legs. Now here's the scary part. Single-sided nippers go through, slice the leg off at the knee, clean it up, and that's going to allow us to adjust the angle any way we want. We'll drill a hole in there, put some paper clip in there, and as you can see, we can sort of bend that like an armature to any angle. Now, in order to get the pose we want, we're going to have to core out some of these joints to give them a little more range of movement. And once we've got our legs assembled, we'll go ahead and use some green stuff to fill in that gap, make it look like one of those sort of soft seals or rubberized seal like we see on the back of the other leg. With our legs put into position, we can go ahead and start building the rest of the body. It went together really cleanly despite the fact this is a slightly older kit. We'll go ahead and join the torso to the legs on the base, and then put our arms in. Some minor adjustments to the sword hand here, but overall everything else is just sort of stock as it is. Once we've got it assembled, we'll go through and prime it, and like everything else, we'll start with a airbrush prime, a Vallejo black surface primer. This stuff is really great. It even goes on with a brush really well. You don't have to have an airbrush to get good results with that particular primer. Then we'll do a zenithal. We're going to work this from the top down, and while we've got our white out, we're going to go ahead and keeping our head separate. We're going to go ahead and put a white prime on that. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now we're going to do that shadow side spray again. This is Vallejo Gory Red, which is like a dark, richer red mixed with some dark elf flesh, which is kind of a brownish color. We'll do that on our shadow side, and then we'll go through on the highlight side and just hit it with that pure bloody red from Vallejo. And that gives us this really punchy red. Then we'll go through and, again, maintaining that theme, we'll get a gradient up from the feet here. This is just a black from Vallejo, but any black would do. And we're just carefully working a gradient with the airbrush up from the feet, sort of trying to match that blend that goes between the ankle and the knee. Once that's all set, we'll pop back over to the head. Here I'm spraying some white on that. Doesn't really show up on the camera, but we're using that same ivory white that we use everywhere else. And then we'll go through and paint all the soft seals and the vents with Administratum Gray. We'll do the same trick here and make some big old leg warmers out of poster tack to protect our gradient. And then using the airbrush, put down our 2 coats of white primer and then a coat of ivory. Once those are settled in, we'll go ahead and put our Seraphim Sepia wash on. Now, this isn't pure out of the bottle. I've mixed it 3-to-1, so that's 3 drops of Lamy medium to 1 drop of the shade. Once that's dry, we're going to go ahead and dry brush that ivory over top again to bring out all of our highlights, peel off our mask, and then just go back through and clean up our feet with a little black paint. And here I'm doing some additional detail and edge highlighting with Administratum Gray. We want to paint the blade and put a really cool gradient on there, but of course we don't want any overspray on the work we've done, so we seal that in a baggie in order to do that. And with the sword complete, we'll go through and start working on the final details of the model. Here I'm just using Nuln oil to shade all of the soft seals and the bases of all of these sort of shapes on the armor to bring out the detail. And lastly, we'll apply our decals. This one's especially tricky. This is a compound complex shape, meaning it curves in 2 directions. So we'll put down our decal and making sure that there's a bed of water there so we can slide it around. Now the trick to making this work is decal softener. That's going to go ahead and make the decal much more malleable, and then you can take a flat brush and sort of brush the air bubbles and creases out, and you get this perfect painted on look. And here I am quietly cursing that I decided to make all the weapons white as an aesthetic choice. Again, that's 3 coats of paint and then a pin wash in order to get the weapons done. With most of our details complete, we go ahead and attach the head, and the final thing we need to put on here is the shoulder-mounted cannon. We've kept this separate for ease of painting. Instead of doing multiple layers, I just hit it with the airbrush, quickly pin washed it with Seraphim Sepia, and then using some Tamiya Thin, which is this great glue that adheres really quickly, attach that to the shoulder mount. And there you have it, 1 Aeldari Combat Patrol, the Fate Breakers, complete for our monthly Combat Patrol Challenge. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, comment, or subscribe. Drive us to the front of YouTube and help grow our audience. We just hit 6,000 subscribers as the channel continues to grow, and I couldn't be more proud or thankful. Or you can always join our Patreon, linked in the description below. Joining our Patreon at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists help each other out every day with honest and kind feedback. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.